So for this video, I figured I'd share all the problems slash things that I hate about these R50 Pathfinder QX4s. Overall, it's great. This is a second R50 I've had. The first one had a lot less rust on it, but it had other issues, so I ended up getting rid of it. Number one thing is going to be the rust. If you own a Japanese truck or SUV from the 80s or 90s, you probably are familiar with this, especially if you live somewhere that gets a lot of snow and they salt the roads. I don't know if this vehicle is originally from BC. I have my doubts that it is. If you look here, this fender quarter panel area was rotted out really bad. I took the flare off, cut away a bunch of the rusty metal, and put this piece of, I think it's some kind of stainless on there, filled the cavity with foam. The rocker panel under this door is pretty bad too. There's some on the other side as well. But yeah, number one issue is rust. It's just unfortunate that the steel just wouldn't hold up to it, and back then a lot of people just didn't care, and that's what you end up with. Problem number two is the engine in these things. Anyone who's owned one will tell you that it's a reliable engine, and that's true. It's just working on it's kind of annoying. I'll open the hood here and I'll show you. Again, pretty basic engine, reliable for the most part. You probably won't be able to see it, but if you look kind of down the valve cover, it's clean-ish at the moment. Not too much oil. I ended up kind of going through it and replacing just this side, but these are known to leak oil after a while. The kind of rubber, the valve seal gasket turns into really hard rubber and it just lets a bunch of oil out, and then it drips on the heat shield there, and it smells like you're burning oil, not through the engine, just on the outside of it. This side is easy enough to do. I've seen people do this side on YouTube. It's quite a bit of work. There's a lot of stuff you have to take off just to get to the valve cover on this side. Not the end of the world, but you are going to lose some oil here and there if you leave it. Otherwise, this engine is a little underpowered. If it made like 180 horsepower, that'd be nice. I think from the factory it was around 160. It's probably a little bit less than that now, although this is a much better runner than my Pathfinder was. That thing had all kinds of misfire issues. Tried to address. This distributor is notorious for starting to go, and then that's where you get the misfires from. I replaced that, the spark plug wires, the spark plugs, and just kind of gave up on it and ended up with this one instead. Next issue is probably the headlights. Just not very bright. Again, it's a 90s vehicle. The headlights were kind of whatever back then. At least they're glass, I guess, but you can get slightly better bulbs. I have hella bulbs in there instead. They're a little bit better, although leaves a lot to be desired driving around at night. Does have the factory fog lights, which also have hella bulbs in them. Still not that great. The aux beam lights I have up here, those will be much better for winter driving especially. And moving inside, the interior on these, it's fine. It feels like they've kind of put car interior into an SUV, if you know what I mean. Like, you just kind of sit on the car, but not in the same way you would as some like newer trucks and SUVs. The seats are pretty small. I'm not super tall, but there's a lot of issues with legroom, at least for me on the driver's side. And the seats, just like, these are the Pathfinder seats. I had to swap out the Infiniti seats. They were the kind of plush real leather, but they were just in horrible shape and they smelled. So before I scrapped the Pathfinder, I threw as much interior stuff as I could from it into this thing. The main issue I have with the seats in these is that the lumbar support is just crazy. Like, you can't, the driver's seat has adjustable lumbar, and I ended up cutting a bunch of foam out of the driver's seat because it was just too much. Even with the lumbar at the lowest setting, it just killed my back. Driving it for 30 minutes, I'd end up with a bunch of back pain, and it's better, but still, like longer trips, these seats are not comfortable, and neither is that center console armrest thing. It's not actually soft. There's almost no foam in there. Kind of same goes for the armrest on the doors. This has like a tiny bit of foam in it. This is all hard plastic. Obviously, it's definitely not real wood. Not very comfortable. And the transmission, while I'm in here looking at this, it's a 4-speed. It searches a lot for kind of between third and fourth when you're on the highway. Once it does kind of shift into fourth or downshift when you need to speed up and pass someone, you really don't get that much out of it once you're already at 80, 90 kilometers an hour. It cruises on the highway fine. In town, once you're kind of getting through first and second, these things are known to lurch pretty hard going from first to second. It's a common issue. Some people on the forums have said there's ways to fix it, but it's kind of whatever for now. It doesn't even seem like it's worth looking into. And my biggest issue of all with this vehicle, I don't know if this happens to everyone's R50s. This is the second R50 I've had. It happened to the Pathfinder as well. But the gauge cluster just kind of gives up after a while. So if you look, give it a second here, it is showing that the coolant temperature is completely maxed out. And it will also say that the fuel is full, which is just not true. The odometer is completely maxed out. And start it here. Okay, so I didn't do it this time, but quite often the tack needle will just kind of bounce off the little pin there, and it'll make a really annoying ticking sound because it just does it so much. First time I heard it, I thought it was something wrong with the engine, but you come to a stop and then you can see that it's just the needle bouncing off the pin there. This isn't the end of the world. It's just annoying because, again, you can't get a new gauge cluster. There are people that on eBay, you send it to them, they'll fix it for 150, 200 bucks. You could try to get one out of a junkyard, but from what I've seen on YouTube is that the connections on the backside on the circuit board, all the soldering, it just gets weak over time from vibration, or it just wasn't done well enough from the factory. And then you end up with maxed out fuel and temperature gauge and a speedometer that rarely works. If it decides to kind of work, it'll kind of hover around like 20 to 40 kilometers an hour. Randomly the tack will start working and give you a roughly estimate reading. I've kind of found my own way around this. I use just an app on my phone for a speedometer, and I've got an OBD to Bluetooth connector thing that goes to my phone. So if I really want to know what the coolant temperature is or how many volts I'm getting out of the alternator, I can look at those things with the OBD2 app. Works well enough. Even if the speedometer did work, I guess it's off by, I think, 5 or 10 kilometers an hour just because of the bigger tires. And sure, if it worked properly, I could get it adjusted maybe. But yeah, it's kind of annoying when you're out on a trip somewhere and you just have to stop for gas more often than you probably would if the gas gauge actually worked, because the last thing I want is to run out of gas with this thing in the middle of nowhere. And one last thing I'll say is the turning radius on this thing is absolutely atrocious. Just horrible when you're out on a kind of single track old logging road somewhere, turns into a dead end. You're doing like a 20 plus point turn just to get out of there, or if you really wanted, you could just back out. But yeah, it's for how short the wheelbase is, I just can't believe how bad the turning radius is compared to vehicles from the same era. Can't really speak for a modern vehicle like a newer 4Runner or Wrangler, but this is probably one of the worst vehicles I've driven as far as turning radius. Like, I've seen buses turn better than this thing. Some people say it's really not that bad. No, it is awful. It kind of ruins the fun of exploring a new trail, because just in the back of your mind, you're always wondering if you do end up having to do one of those 20+ point turns, huge time killer, and probably not great for the steering pump to be cranking the wheel all the way to the left and right all the time.